The smoke is thick, acrid. It chokes the air, stinging eyes and lungs, making every breath a battle. Flames lick at the wooden tables, devouring bolts of fabric, transforming the vast factory floor into a roaring inferno. Panic grips the hundreds of young women trapped within, their frantic screams lost in the cacophony of breaking glass and collapsing timber. The doors, heavy and unforgiving, are jammed, some locked from the outside, turning escape routes into impassable barriers. The fire escape, a flimsy metal ladder, buckles under the weight of desperate bodies, twisting and tearing from the brick, plunging those clinging to it into the abyss below. On the 9th floor of the ash building, a horrifying choice presents itself: burn alive or jump. One after another, figures appear at the windows, silhouetted against the hellish glow. They hesitate for a fraction of a second, then leap, their dresses flaring like dark wings against the gray New York sky. The sickening thud of bodies hitting the pavement below is muffled by the wails of onlookers, a sound that will haunt a city for generations. What could possibly drive a human being to choose such a brutal, certain death over the hope of rescue? But to understand how we got here, how such a horrifying scene could unfold in the heart of one of the world's most vibrant cities, we need to go back. Before the smoke, before the screams, before the unthinkable choices. We need to rewind to the turn of the 20th century, to a bustling New York City teeming with life, ambition, and the promise of a new beginning. Millions of immigrants poured into America's shores, escaping poverty, persecution, and hopelessness in their homelands. They arrived in New York with little more than the clothes on their backs and an unwavering desire to build a better life, not just for themselves, but for their families left behind, or for the children they hoped to raise in this land of opportunity. The Lower East Side was a crucible of cultures, a vibrant mosaic of languages, traditions, and dreams, all converging in overcrowded tenements and bustling street markets. The city was a colossal engine of industry, churning out goods for a rapidly expanding nation, and for many, the path to prosperity lay in the burgeoning garment district. This was a time of normal lives, normal people pursuing normal aspirations, utterly unaware that the very buildings they worked in held a latent peril, waiting for the slightest provocation to unleash its wrath. A city brimming with hope was about to face a harsh, fiery reckoning. The garment industry, specifically, was a colossal engine of the new American economy. New York City, by 1910, produced nearly 80% of all women's clothing in the United States, a staggering volume fueled by cheap labor and relentless demand. The shirtwaist, a stylish, ready-to-wear blouse, was the must-have fashion item for women entering the modern workforce, and factories like the Triangle Shirtwaist Company were at the forefront of this booming market. Located on the top 3 floors, the 8th, 9th, and 10th of the modern, fireproof ash building at 2329 Washington Place, the Triangle Factory employed hundreds of workers, predominantly young Jewish and Italian immigrant women, many barely teenagers. Owners Isaac Harris and Max Blank, known as the Shirtwaist Kings, ran a highly profitable, ruthlessly efficient operation. Their factory epitomized the industrial model of the era: long hours, low wages, and a workforce considered expendable in the relentless pursuit of profit. This was a period when workers had few rights, unions were often suppressed violently, and government regulation of workplace safety was almost non-existent. The stage was set not just for prosperity, but for a systemic vulnerability that would prove catastrophic, where human lives were considered a cheaper commodity than safety upgrades. A system built on profit, often at the expense of human dignity, was poised for a breaking point. The idea that a catastrophic fire could engulf a garment factory was not some abstract, unforeseen horror. Far from it. The industry was plagued by such incidents. Just 2 years prior, in 1909, the Triangle Factory itself had experienced 2 small fires, both quickly extinguished, but they were clear signals of the inherent dangers. More broadly, the deplorable working conditions across the garment district had fueled the infamous uprising of 20,000, a massive strike by shirtwaist makers, largely women, demanding better pay, shorter hours, and critically, improved safety measures. Rose Schneiderman, a prominent union organizer, famously declared, "The life of men and women is so cheap and property is so sacred." There are so many of us for one job, it matters little if 146 of us are burned to death. During the strike, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, ILGWU, specifically demanded unlocked doors, fire escapes, and sprinklers. Harris and Blank, however, were among the most resistant factory owners, refusing to concede on critical safety demands, fearing that unlocked doors would lead to theft and easier union organizing. They saw safety precautions not as essential safeguards, but as unnecessary expenses that cut into their profit margins. These warnings, whispered by the vulnerable, echoed unheard through the corridors of power and profit. The conditions inside the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory were a disaster waiting to happen, a meticulously crafted death trap masked by the appearance of a thriving business. The work floor was packed with rows upon rows of sewing machines, barely leaving enough room for workers to move, let alone evacuate quickly. A labyrinth of narrow aisles snaked between the tables, frequently obstructed by stacks of fabric, cutting patterns, and overflowing bins of highly flammable cotton scraps. These scraps, left to accumulate for weeks, sometimes months, were the perfect kindling. Barrels of machine oil and gasoline, used to power the cutting machines, sat openly on the floors, adding volatile fuel to an already volatile environment. The fire suppression systems, though available at the time, were deemed too costly by Blank and Harris. There were no sprinklers, and the few water buckets were often empty or out of reach. Fire drills were non-existent, and many workers, especially the newest immigrants, barely spoke English, meaning vital instructions would have been lost in translation even if they were given. Every element, from the layout of the machines to the very materials handled daily, conspired to create an environment where a small spark could ignite a raging inferno, and where escape was an afterthought, an inconvenience to be minimized. The stage for catastrophe was not merely set, it was meticulously constructed, piece by agonizing piece. On Saturday, March 25, 1911, just moments before the 4:45 p.m. quitting bell, a fire broke out on the 8th floor of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. The precise cause remains officially unknown, but the most widely accepted theory suggests a discarded cigarette or a spark from a cutting machine ignited a pile of fabric scraps in a waste bin beneath one of the cutting tables. The scraps, bone dry and piled high, instantly caught fire. The flames spread with terrifying speed. Dora Mayo, a 16-year-old worker, later recounted seeing the blaze erupt, describing how quickly it consumed the highly flammable material. Another witness, Katie Weiner, working on the 9th floor, initially mistook the smoke she smelled for a mere brush fire, a common occurrence. But it was far from common. The foreman on the 8th floor, Gaspar Mortellaro, grabbed buckets of water, but they were useless against the rapidly expanding blaze, fueled by thousands of pounds of cotton, lace, and tissue paper. The fire alarm on the 8th floor was manually triggered, but crucially, this alarm system was designed only to ring on the floor where it was pulled, and the 9th and 10th floors remained oblivious to the impending doom for critical minutes. This precious delay, fueled by outdated technology and systemic oversights, would prove fatal. But the initial outbreak by itself could not explain the scale of the horror that was about to unfold. As the fire raged on the 8th floor, its fury quickly moved upwards. Workers on the 9th floor, directly above, only became aware of the fire when smoke began seeping through the floorboards and flames licked up the elevator shafts. But then came the crucial, horrifying realization: the exits were blocked. The main exit to the single fire escape on the Green Street side was locked, allegedly to prevent workers from stealing fabric or taking unauthorized breaks, a common practice in many sweatshops of the era. Factory foremen routinely locked doors until closing time. Another exit, leading to a staircase on the Washington Place side, was clear, but many workers were unaware of it or couldn't reach it through the inferno. The only functional exit for a large portion of the 9th floor was a single, narrow door leading to a staircase that opened onto the Washington Place side. However, the other door, connecting to the Green Street staircase, was locked shut. This was not an oversight, it was a deliberate policy enforced by the owners, Isaac Harris and Max Blank. This single, unyielding fact would seal the fate of dozens. Everything pointed one way, towards an accidental industrial fire. But then the workers discovered the truth. They were not simply trapped by fire, they were imprisoned by their employers. The negligence wasn't passive, it was an active blockade against survival. The grim details revealed the depth of the systemic failure. The ash building itself, though considered fireproof due to its steel and concrete construction, was only fireproof in structure, not in content or human egress. The interiors were a different story. The wooden floors, ceilings, and vast quantities of highly flammable cotton fabric, combined with inadequate exit routes, turned a modern building into a death trap. The single fire escape, a flimsy metal structure on the Green Street side, was poorly maintained and quickly buckled and collapsed under the weight of desperate workers trying to descend. It was designed to support only a fraction of the weight it was subjected to, a cruel illusion of safety. Adding to the horror, the building's fire hoses were rotten and the water valves were rusted shut, rendering them useless even if they could be reached. As the fire escalated, the owners, Isaac Harris and Max Blank, managed to escape via the roof to an adjacent building, leaving their employees to face the inferno below. Their hasty retreat underscored the chilling reality. Their lives and their property were deemed more valuable than the lives of their workers. This was not just an accident of circumstance, it was the inevitable conclusion of a deliberate pattern of neglect and cost-cutting, where every safety measure was sacrificed at the altar of profit. And as the flames consumed the factory, a grim truth began to solidify. This was not just an accident, it was a consequence. Beyond the staggering number of 146 dead, each statistic represented a life, a story, a family shattered. Consider the story of Sarah Spiegel. At just 16 years old, Sarah had immigrated from Russia a few years prior, full of hope, sending meager earnings home to her family. On March 25, 1911, she was working on the 9th floor, her shift almost over. Like so many others, she was trapped. Her body was later identified by her brother at the makeshift morgue on the city pier, a chilling, soul-crushing experience for countless families. Then there was Yetta Goldstein, also 16, who had bravely testified during the 1909 strike, advocating for safer conditions. She was among those who made the desperate jump, her body found on the sidewalk. Or the heroic actions of Max Roth, a 20-year-old bookkeeper who managed to save his sister and several others by leading them to a different exit, only to lose his own life when he went back to help more. His ultimate sacrifice underscores the desperate heroism amidst the horror. These were not anonymous workers. They were individuals with names, dreams, and futures brutally stolen. They were sisters, daughters, brothers, fiancés, aspiring artists, and students, all contributing to the American dream they had been promised. Their collective loss rippled through a city, leaving an indelible scar. Their stories, individually heartbreaking, collectively painted a mosaic of unspeakable tragedy. In the immediate aftermath of the fire, public outcry was immense and immediate. The sheer scale of the preventable loss of life demanded accountability. Factory owners Isaac Harris and Max Blank were indicted on charges of first-degree manslaughter. The prosecution meticulously laid out their case, emphasizing the locked doors and the owner's blatant disregard for safety regulations. However, the trial, which began in December 1911, quickly became mired in legal complexities. The defense argued that the locked doors were not proven to be locked by the owners themselves, or that workers, in their panic, might have jammed them. They also introduced the narrative of the fire being an unforeseen accident, an act of God, perhaps caused by careless smoking on the part of the workers. After a short deliberation, the jury acquitted both Harris and Blank, declaring them not guilty. The verdict sent shockwaves through a grieving city and nation. The legal system, it seemed, had failed to deliver justice. While the owners escaped criminal culpability, they did, however, profit handsomely. They received significant insurance payouts for the loss of their property, collecting approximately $400 per deceased worker, a sum vastly disproportionate to the meager compensation offered to the victims' families, if any was received at all. The pursuit of justice, it seemed, was as obstructed as the factory's exits. Despite the acquittal, the public outrage did not dissipate. It intensified, catalyzing a monumental shift in political will. The sheer horror of the Triangle fire became a potent symbol for the Progressive era's reform movements. Governor John Alden Dix appointed the Factory Investigating Commission, FIC, co-chaired by State Senator Robert F. Wagner and Assemblyman Alfred E. Smith, both future titans of American politics. Critically, Frances Perkins, a social worker and future U.S. Secretary of Labor, witnessed the fire firsthand from the street below, an experience that profoundly shaped her life's work. Her chilling eyewitness account of women jumping to their deaths galvanized her resolve to fight for workplace safety. The FIC embarked on an unprecedented investigation, inspecting over 2,000 factories, interviewing countless workers, and documenting the appalling conditions prevalent across New York State. Their findings were shocking: widespread disregard for safety, dangerous machinery, inadequate ventilation, and rampant child labor. They did not merely focus on fire safety, they exposed the entire ecosystem of industrial exploitation. Their relentless work began to peel back layers of systemic neglect, revealing a terrifying landscape of industrial peril. In the face of undeniable tragedy and public demand for answers, the initial official narratives and the defense in the trial attempted to deflect blame away from the systemic failures of the factory owners. The argument was often made that the fire was merely an accident, an unpredictable tragedy, possibly caused by workers carelessly discarding cigarettes near flammable materials. This narrative subtly shifted responsibility onto the victims themselves, implying their own actions, rather than managerial negligence, were the root cause. Furthermore, the argument that the doors were not maliciously locked, but simply jammed by panicked crowds or blocked by debris, was frequently invoked, attempting to downplay deliberate acts of imprisonment. The fire escape, they claimed, collapsed not because of inherent flaws in its design or maintenance, but solely due to the overwhelming, unforeseen weight of desperate people. These explanations served to whitewash the grim reality of unchecked industrial practices and the owner's pursuit of profit at any cost. While these arguments were enough to secure an acquittal in a legal system that then heavily favored property rights over human rights, they failed to quell the deeper public conviction that profound injustice had occurred. The official explanation offered a convenient, but ultimately hollow, solace to those who sought to maintain the status quo. But beneath the veneer of official pronouncements, a more unsettling reality continued to smolder. The most credible explanation for the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire points unequivocally not to a single spark or an unforeseen accident, but to a profound, pervasive, and deliberate systemic failure driven by unchecked greed. The evidence overwhelmingly indicates that the owners, Isaac Harris and Max Blank, prioritized profit above all else. They routinely locked exit doors to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks, a common but illegal practice that effectively trapped hundreds of workers. The fire escape was a known hazard, flimsy and inadequate for the building's occupancy, yet it was never upgraded or properly maintained. The absence of sprinklers, proper fire drills, and accessible, functioning fire hoses were not oversights. They were conscious cost-saving measures in an industry notorious for exploiting its workforce. The fire simply exposed the horrific consequences of these cumulative decisions. The flammable materials, narrow aisles, and lack of trained emergency personnel created an environment where, once a fire started, rapid escape was impossible. The fire itself was a tragedy, but the scale of the death toll was a direct result of management's active and passive negligence. It was an industrial homicide, not by direct malicious intent, but by a callous disregard for the safety and lives of their employees. It pointed not to a singular spark of tragedy, but to a slow, deliberate accumulation of danger. Among the myriad of horrifying details surrounding the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, one fact stands out, searing in its injustice and its chilling indictment of an era. While 146 souls perished in the inferno, victims who were predominantly young immigrant women earning meager wages of $7 to $12 a week, the factory owners, Isaac Harris and Max Blank, were able to collect a substantial sum in insurance money for their destroyed property. For the loss of their building and its contents, they received approximately $60,000, which in today's money would be well over $1.5 million. This payout amounted to roughly $400 for each life lost in the fire. In stark, brutal contrast, the families of the victims, those who had lost daughters, sisters, and mothers, received a paltry compensation of just $75 per deceased loved one, and even then, only after protracted legal battles and public outcry. Many families received nothing at all. This staggering disparity, $400 for a machine or a bolt of fabric versus $75 for a human life, underscored a profound, deeply unsettling truth about the value placed on property versus people in early 20th century industrial America. It was a cold, economic equation that laid bare the callous disregard for human life that permeated the era's labor practices. And in that stark financial disparity, the ultimate indictment of an era of unchecked capitalism found its most chilling expression. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, while a horrific tragedy, became a pivotal moment in American history, forever altering the landscape of labor laws and worker safety. The public outrage, fueled by the staggering death toll and the blatant injustice of the owner's acquittal, forced a national reckoning. The Factory Investigating Commission's tireless work led to the passage of over 30 new laws and regulations in New York State alone, dramatically improving fire safety, working conditions, and labor standards. These included mandatory fire drills, automatic sprinkler systems, unlocked exits, and stricter building codes. Critically, the tragedy galvanized the labor movement, strengthening unions and giving a powerful voice to workers who had long been exploited. Frances Perkins, the eyewitness who would later become the first woman to serve in a U.S. cabinet position under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, explicitly cited the Triangle Fire as the catalyst for her lifelong dedication to social and labor reform. Her work laid the groundwork for many of the protections we take for granted today, from minimum wage to child labor laws. The memory of the Triangle Fire remains a stark reminder that progress often comes at an unimaginable cost, but that vigilance and advocacy are eternal in the struggle to value human life over profit. It tells us that history, however dark, holds vital lessons if we are willing to learn them, pushing us to remember the faces behind the numbers and the ongoing fight for a more just world. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.